Hi there! So this tutorial is going to take over from where the live stream Bouncy Cactus started to get quite a bit more general and less specific. Here is what we're going to make here. A super bouncy cactus. All of these source files are available to you in the description, and I hope you'll play along. And we're going to start off where we left off previously. So here we go. This was the somewhat bouncy cactus, which is cute enough, but we're going to make it super bouncy. What I did was I created a rough animation using Adobe Animate. And we're going to take that rough animation and we're going to plop it right in here by importing it. Here's my cactus rough. Okay, and here I have the same file that is in the description, the PSD file. And I imported it using import as composition, retain layer sizes, all described in the YouTube Live. I'm taking that SWF file, which is a vector movie, and I'm just going to drag and drop it right on top, okay? And as I scrub through my playhead, you can see this very rudimentary version of what I want to happen in the animation. And I'm going to mark where each of the new drawings is happening in my SWF file, okay? So let me hide my guides, and I'm going to make markers using layer, markers, add marker. And I use the number pad asterisk because I have an extended keyboard. If you don't have an extended keyboard, you can use shift number 8. Okay, so I'm just going to keep advancing using command or control and right arrow until I get to a drawing. There's a little chicken scratch in the corner that indicates what drawing number it is, roughly. There's number 2. And these aren't at regular intervals. These are based on the squash and the stretch of how I thought this would look best. And I'm just making those markers. And even though this drawing is also called number 7, it's a bit different than the previous number 7. So I'm just going to call it a new drawing. And then there is the little flowers that pop on. And finally, there's the blink, or the wink rather. Okay, so those are my marks. So I'm going to parent my layers a particular way so that they all connect to each other. I'm going to lock the background. And in the live stream, I animated this auto-traced background blob. And I did do a little bit of effect work on it using wiggle gelatin, and I kind of like it. So I'm just going to use that again. If you want to learn how to do that one, you can watch the replay. Okay, so there's that. This cactus piece is going to be parented to the pot. And I need to set anchor points as well. So I'm just going to select all these guys, hit letter T for opacity, and change everyone's opacity value to 50. And I'm going to set the anchor points based on where I want each of these layers to move, rotate, and scale from. So here's my anchor point tool. I'm going to set cactus 1 right here. Then it keeps trying to select my SWF, so I'll lock that. Here we go. There's another piece. Here's another one. And just always setting the anchor point to where the overlap area is, okay? And let's just zoom in here so I can get the flowers as well. There we go. And let's just zoom back and just double checking. Sometimes anchor points, or at least my anchor points, like to move around on their own. These are the eyes. I'm going to set the eye anchor point right here. And here's the pot. I'm going to set the pot anchor point right here. Okay, and let's now set up some parenting relationships. So I want the eyes and Cactus 1 to be connected to the pot. Okay, now if you aren't seeing this parent and link column, you can bring it up by just right-clicking, going to columns and choosing parent and link, right? So Cactus 1 and the eyes are now parented to the pot. This guy and this guy, Cactus 2 and 3, are parented to Cactus 1. This guy and this guy, Cactus 5 and 4, are parented to Cactus 2. No, not Cactus 2, I lied. They are parented to whatever this guy is, which is Cactus 3. So 5 and 4 connect to 3. Okay? And finally, our flowers connect to Cactus 5. Okay. So now everything is connected through parenting except for the pot because it doesn't need any parents. Okay, so I'm going to change everybody's opacity back to 100%. And I'm going to start the animation process. Okay, so I want the pot to land right here on frame number 6. Okay, so I'm going to select my pot layer and hit P for position, and then hold Shift and type S for scale and R for rotation. I'm going to turn on the stopwatches for all those guys at that point in time. I'm going to take all my other layers though, and I'm going to turn off their visibility so I don't get distracted by them, okay? I'm also going to swivel all their other properties closed. This makes it just nice and clean while I'm working. Okay, so it's going to end up here. I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to move it up into the sky. So with my selection tool, just going to drag it up, holding Shift. It's going to lock it to the vertical. I'm going to change this first keyframe to an ease and it lands, right? But according to our guide animation from Adobe Animate, also known as Flash, it needs to rotate and it needs to scale. So I'm going to scale it, but I'm going to scale it disproportionately so it really feels like it's squashing, right? That's a decent amount of squash, and I'm just going to rotate it back slightly so it aligns better, and I'm going to apply the effect Bezier Warp. So in the Effects and Presets search area, I'm going to type in BEZ, there's Bezier Warp, and then I'm going to pull these handles out nicely. And I'm maybe going to push these guys in a little bit, okay? The reason why is because I really want it to feel like the mass is getting pushed off to this side a little bit, all right? And I'm going to turn on all these stopwatches next to Bezier Warp, and then I'm going to hit the letter U to see all my keyframes in my timeline, okay? Now, one frame before it hits, I want this to not be rotated or scaled. So I'm going to click on the rotation value and type 0. I'm going to uncheck the chain link next to scale and change both of those numbers to 100. And I'm going to reset my Bezier Warp. Okay, so that's one frame before it lands because it's not like a sentient flower pot. It's not thinking like, oh no, the floor is coming. I should probably cower in fear. No, nothing like that. We just want it to like suddenly hit and distort, okay? So let's set that to fit and play it back. Okay, so now it hit. And here comes the fun part. You ready? I'm gonna take, let me actually turn on my background here and turn off my blob for the moment. I'm gonna take all these keyframes here, all these guys, and I'm going to change them to what are called hold keyframes. So I go to the animation menu and I go to toggle hold keyframe, which you can see is Control-Alt-H on a PC or Command-Option-H on a Mac. Okay, so let me just zoom in on my timeline a little bit here so we can see those keyframes up close and personal. And now I've got all those guys ready. All right, so what's my next position? My next position is like this. And then let's go to the extreme position of it, which is up there. Okay, so animation is a series of extremes and in-betweens. And so our first extreme was way up in the sky. Our second extreme was the squash. And then our third extreme is going to be this extreme stretch. So I'm going to reset my Bezier warp. I'm going to go down to scale and change that to 100 and 100. Okay, I'm going to rotate it using my rotation tool. And it's got to tilt kind of like that. And with my selection tool, I'm going to move it up into the air. And then comes the fun part. Then, once I'm happy with the rotation, I'm going to go and attack it with the Bezier warp once more, because I want this to have the same kind of curvature that I see in the rough animation, because that's really fun, right? And I can move this up a little bit. And I can move these circular handles to kind of squash the inside. Okay. There are other effects too that work well for this kind of distortion, including mesh warp, and you can use puppet pins, but I find that this one is a good sort of starter for people who've not used this kind of thing before. Okay, so I can see from this middle position here that the Cactus 1 should show up right around there. Okay, so I'm just going to have it end up here. And then over like here, we're going to have Cactus 2 perhaps. So I'll turn on the visibility next to Cactus 2 and set that to come up here. So if I hit S for scale, yep, that looks fine. Actually not Cactus 2, I lied. We want Cactus 3, which is the other big piece, right? So with Cactus 3, I'm gonna have it rotate into place and kind of move as well. Okay, so like earlier in life, well, let me just shorten this up right here. So earlier in life, I'm going to have it be like perfect. And then once it gets to this point, it's going to be rotated, moved, etc. So I know there's no content, but we'll get there. So P for position, holding Shift, S, and R. I'm going to turn on all those and right click, toggle hold. Okay, so those are going to stay at that value until they get here. And then I can rotate this guy. And I can move it like so. And this is all in the name of getting that nice curvature that I established in my rough animation, right? So there's my scale and, there's my position and rotation adjusted there. And then maybe just a little bit later, when it lands down, I'm gonna have those other little limbs appear, okay? So yeah, let's get Cactus 2 in on this action. I'm just shortening it with the little double-ended arrow at the end of the layer content bar. And once again, moving it here, P, hold Shift, SR, turning on all those guys, setting those to hold keyframes. And then right here, I'm going to move it, whoops, moving it from inside, there we go. Rotate it, W for the rotation tool, right? And now I've got those keyframes. Awesome. Okay. Moving on, let's go to the next position, which is this. So for this, we want to bring the position back to where it was on our flower pot. And everything follows because it's parented. I want my Bezier warp to quit being so warpy. I want to change my rotation to be 0. And I'm going to squash it. So take my selection tool and grab a corner and squash it down. Okay, so there's a little squash, and I can click the word Bezier warp and warp it a bit more. So it's got a little bit more volume to it like that, right? Okay, and at this point in time, I think I need to move some stuff around so that it more closely resembles what we started with. So I'm going to take Cactus 3, copy paste its first position keyframe, and take my rotation tool and rotate that guy up like this. And his friends, Cactus 4 and 5, should show up right around here. So let me just close up all these dudes, and Cactus 5 and Cactus 4 are both going to kind of show up around here, okay? In addition, here's Cactus 2. I'm going to copy paste her first position keyframe from here to here. And then I'm also going to set the rotation to 0. So it's like that, okay? And I could actually like tilt this down a bit. I can take this guy and I'm just gonna set that position, scale, rotation stuff for Cactus 4 and 5 at this point in time too. So P, hold Shift, S, R, and I know it's before the layer content bar starts, but that's okay. Means to an end. And then right here, I can start messing with things. So I call this like dog ears down, like because they're kind of flapped like that. And this guy, if I hit letter R to see its rotation, see how it's like 20 degrees rotated. So that's pretty good. And then right here, it stretches again. So I'm going to take my pot, I'm going to reset its Bezier warp, hit letter U to see all its keyframes, and start messing with the scale and rotation and so on. Okay, so that was squashed, that was stretched, that was squashed some. And ideally you want to keep your same volume, but it gets kind of messy when you're dealing with warp in addition to the volume here. Generally speaking, if I'm just animating scale, I make sure that my two numbers add up to 200, but when you're adding Bezier warp, it kind of throws that equation off a little bit. So now I'm going to stretch up, and I'm not going to rotate that, but I am going to rotate this guy. So hit letter U. Ooh, this guy didn't have any rotation keyframes, so let's just make sure he gets some. P, hold Shift, S, R, and I'm going to make all those hold keyframes. And then here, W for the rotation tool. And then over here, W for the rotation tool back. And then over here, W for the rotation tool forward. Okay, and then this guy is going to rotate this way. And this guy's going to rotate this way. Doggy ears are going up, right? Because it's leaning that way. And okay, so we're just animating rotation on that. And then this squashes back down. And then this is our settle right here. This is our final position, is frame 31. So we have one more squash to do. You ready? I'm going to select the pot, click reset, and you can click reset in either place. You can either do it in effect controls or you can do it down in the timeline. It doesn't matter. And then I go to my scale, and I'm going to set my scale to 100 and 100. And I'm just going to squash it down slightly. So I'm going to squash it down slightly like this. And then, okay, then I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to do a little bit more rotation because, you know, need to kind of even it out again. And this is still kind of squashed. So it's going to be, if I hit letter X, scrolls up like that. Just going to be a little bit more doggy ears down. X to scroll to the top again. Okay, and finally, frame 31, the one we've been waiting for. So I'm going to set my scale to 100 and 100. I'm going to reset my Bezier warp. I'm going to set my Cactus 1 to 0 rotation. Cactus 4 is going to be 0 rotation. Yeah, you get the idea. Everybody gets 0 rotation. Okay, and then let's check out scale. Scale wasn't happening, so just hitting letter U. There we go. And yeah, that should be where everything belonged. Now, if there's ever any question about whether you screwed up your lockup, join the club. What you want to do is import a flattened version. So go File menu, go Import File, and you want to navigate over to your PSD, but this time you're going to import it as footage with merged layers. Okay, so import kind footage, merged layers, and I hit OK. I'm going to take that guy and drag it right on top. T for opacity, change it to 50. Make sure it's starting at the beginning. And then I'm going to right click and set it to guide. This way it doesn't export. Just right clicking the name, you get to the guide thingy. And I'm going to lock it. And it actually lines up really well. If yours doesn't, that's a good time to just get everything back in gear. All right, so I'm going to show my roughs once more. And I want my flowers to show up right here. So I'm going to turn on their visibility and I'm going to shorten them up so they kind of come in one at a time right here. I think that's going to be pretty good. And now let's do some intense timeline work. You ready? I'm going to hover my mouse in the timeline and hit the tilde or squiggle key that's located below the escape key on your keyboard. Okay. And what I want to do first is I want to make sure that everything is keyframed that should be. So for example, here, like the position is done animating. I don't need to worry about that. But on Cactus 3, the rotation is still animating, but there's no keyframe in between here. So I'm just going to click that little dip on rotation. Over here in my pot, we don't have keyframes after these two, so I don't need to worry about it. But on Cactus 2, there's no keyframe for this rotation, so I'm just going to click the little dip. Okay. This ensures that when you do change everything to linear or ease keyframes, it's going to be much, much smoother. Another thing that we didn't do is we didn't animate these pieces coming on. They are merely popping on. So if we watch this, it's going to be very choppy because we're just having layers pop on and there's very little interpolation or in-betweening between our keyframes, right? It just goes pop, pop, pop. All this stuff just sort of randomly showed up, right? So I'm going to have this piece come on at this point in time. And then this piece here, I'm going to have come at this point in time. So it's just going to be a little bit more staggered. Okay. And then I'm going to animate a little bit of scale as well. So I want the scale for each of these guys to hit 100% right where the beginning of the layer content bars are for each of the pieces of the cactus. So at the start of those points in time, and maybe just a touch more stagger wouldn't be a bad thing. At those points in time, I'm just going to set the scale value to be 100%. And then I'm going to extend this guy out and go earlier in time and set that to 0. Okay, so this one here, I'm going to take the scale keyframe and move it earlier, and maybe right about here, extending that in point by just dragging the double-ended arrow thingy on the layer content bar to trim that so it starts at my playhead, and I'm going to change the scale down to 0. Now you can't just scrub it. It's not going to stop at 0. Sometimes it just goes to the negative, so just be careful there. This guy also, I'm going to take the scale, move it earlier, and maybe this one will take a little while to grow on, just like a real cactus. And then this guy needs it too. So just a few frames earlier, I'm going to change its scale to 0. And finally, last but not leastly, we have our Cactus 1. And I'm going to have it grow on starting here. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Okay, and then finally, let's do a little animation on these guys, which I like to animate them together because it's just a little faster. So I just selected both layers, hit letter S for scale, turn on the stopwatches next to the flowers, and then I'm going to advance like 6 frames. So I can click on the time code, type in +6. Nice. Change this to 110 so I get a little overshoot on it. And then a few frames later, just changing that back to 100. And the middle keyframes get an ease. So I can hit F9 or I can right click, go to Keyframe Assistant and choose Easy Ease. Okay, I'm going to select all 3 of these keyframes and just nudge them over so that they align with the layer content bar. Okay, all right, so now it's going to get really exciting. Hovering once more in the timeline, hitting the tilde key, I'm going to change all of these keyframes that are currently hold keyframes to be linear. And then I'm going to kick them up another notch and change them to Bezier keyframes. Bezier keyframes allow some intricate retiming, and that can be really fun. So to change a hold to a linear keyframe again, you can just go back to toggle hold keyframe. Toggle just means to go back and forth. And that didn't work, so I have to do it again. All right, so now we have our linear keyframes, and let's play that back. Okay, not too bad. Oh, my scale value on these flowers should be 0 at the beginning. Double click, you can just change it like that too. Okay, playing it back again. Not bad. All right, so now let's do the fun. So I'm going to take all these keyframes and I'm going to change them to Easy Eases, and that will allow me to retime them using the graph editor. Okay, so I'm going to take all of them, and I just drew a giant box. And just be mindful as you draw that box that you're not like dragging on a layer content bar, but you're doing it on the gray area. Okay, I'm just going to keep going down, down, down. And then I'm going to hit F9 to set these to Easy Ease. Alternatively, you can right click the keyframe, go to Keyframe Assistant and choose Easy Ease there. Okay, and now they are eases, which is wonderful. And this allows us to retime them a little bit. They have more dynamic movement. So if we play this back, okay, it's pretty bouncy. But when it's up in the sky like this, I really want it to like hang out there for a beat. So let me take all these keyframes here. Actually, let me make a big tall box around all the keyframes that are happening at that point in time, including Cactus 1. I'm going to click over to the graph editor, and don't be scared. This is a little mathy. That's a word. Click on where it says choose graph type and options and make sure you're in the speed graph. Otherwise, the value graph looks very, very different. Speed graph, and then under the eyeball section, make sure that show selected properties is the only one that's chosen. Okay, and then I'm going to click fit selection to view, which is right next to the magnifying glass. And what I want is to like get slow coming into this. So I'm going to hold the shift key down and drag on these little circular handles that are happening here. I just dragged one, and because they were all selected, they're all kind of going together. And that's pretty good. I'm going to click back over, hit tilde to get out of that view, and hit spacebar. And that's pretty good. I like that. When it hits the ground, like I want it to get faster coming into here. So let's select these keyframes. And let's make them faster by going back to the graph editor, back to the single noodle, as I call it, and pulling those inward. Okay, so now it's going to get faster as it comes down. See, this is how fast the layer is going, and it's going to peak almost at the bottom. Let's see. Okay, and yeah, you can continue to finesse this, just going through and being like, all right, we want this to come up again here. So what if we selected these keyframes and hung out a little more on them? And I'm just pulling that. Holding the shift key ensures that they kind of stay in one line sometimes. And then I want it to kind of drop fast into this position. So let's have that. Let's try it like this and see what happens. You got to try it just to see how you like it. Let me zoom out on my timeline. And this is what I call massaging your keyframes. Some people would call it something else, but you know. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Now, what you might have noticed about things in the real world is that small things that are attached to the end of larger things tend to have a little bit of what's called delay or secondary action, or overlapping action, some people call it. And the way you create that is by delaying your keyframes. So I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to delay them by a couple of frames. So I'm looking at this frame counter. Now, if you're seeing time code instead, control click on a PC or command click on a Mac in order to see the alternate display style. I like working in frames sometimes. The math is just a little bit easier. And so I'm going to start delaying these. So I did two clicks, and I'm watching this in column. And I'm going to deselect Cactus 3 and then do another delay for Cactus 2, 4, and 5, and then delay those guys a bit more. And finally, Cactus 5, he's going to be a bit later. Okay, and these last keyframes, friends, you can pull those out as well, and that gives it a nice little buoyancy. So let's take a look. Okay, and that looks kind of weird. Like I'm not feeling that, so let's just tame that a little bit. Okay, so maybe that doesn't need to be as late. Let's see. Let's play that back once more. And we can just delay these guys a bit. So it goes down to -10, and then it goes up to positive 10. That's not good. This number here, so I'm just looking at my keyframe values on Cactus 5, it was down to -10. So the next keyframe should actually be more like 3 or 4 in the positive direction. And then we end up at 0. So it doesn't go like so extremely down. And I'm going to inspect my values on Cactus 4 as well. So that went to -24. And then it went to -33. That's also not right. So it should actually come up a little bit past 0 into the positive realm. Maybe like 6 or 7, and then it's going to go back down. That looks pretty cute. I mean, I'm still not totally happy with it, but it's better than it was. I got to move on. So we've got our little flowers popping on. I'm going to make those a little bit later. And let's play it back once more. Okay, I think that's all right. And then I want the eye to fade on and blink. So the eyes, I think, should fade on starting about here. So I'm just going to move the layer content bar for eyes 2 to start at 26 frames. Eyes 2 is my eyes pre-comp. Yours might be just called eyes. I'm going to double click on it so we can see all the glorious layers inside. I click on the transparent grid, and now you can see the eyes much more clearly. And so many eyes. We're going to start with the eyes closed, okay? So let's select all of them, and we're basically going to switch the eye shapes on and off using opacity keyframes set to holds. So with all these layers selected, I hit letter T for opacity and I turn on this, whoops, Command or Control A to select them all, and then click the little stopwatch next to one of them, and then animation toggle hold once more. And I'm going to change everything except for the eyes closed to a 0 value. Okay, when I go back to here, now you'll see that the eyes are closed throughout. Nice. Well, let's do a little bit of fade on that. So T for opacity, and I'm going to have it fade up over the course of, I don't know, like 8 frames or so, nothing crazy. And it's going to fade on like that. And then the eyes are going to open. So after the eyes fade on with the eyelids closed, I'm going to have them open. Double click on eyes 2. And the way that the eyes are going to open is by going through every single eye position. So I select both the closed ones, click the 100 value and type 0. Then these guys, click the 0 value, type 100. I'm going to advance by 2 frames each time, +2. Change that to 0. Okay, so now I have a pair. I have an on-off pair of keyframes. I can select them both, copy them, and then paste them on the next. Advance to the final keyframe of the pair with letter K. Let me just zoom in on my timeline here so you can see it better. Hit K, select the next 2 the next 2 layers. Command V, hit K, select the last 2 right here. Command V, right? Or Control V on a PC, of course. Then when I go back here, you'll get to see the eyes open properly. Okay, well, the eyes shut off after that, so let me just select these 2 and hit delete. Going back. Aw, they look so cute. And then once this all pops on, I'm going to have the right eye only wink. Okay, so to do the eye closing, and it's just the right eye we really need to deal with, I'm going to change the opacity to 0 on eye open right. And we don't need to go through every single position when the eye is closing. We just need to go to eye half. And then 2 frames later, which I can do with Command or Control right arrow, change that to 0, and then go to eye closed right. And keep it there for like 8 frames, I'd say. So I'm just going to click the time code, type +8. Nice. And then I'm going to go back. So I actually need to go back through all the other poses, and that can take a little while. So I'm going to select all these guys. I want quarter right. I want half right. I want 3/4 right. And I want open right. Right? Yeah. So those are all the ones. But you can't actually copy and paste keyframes across from each other. Like if they're on multiple layers, you can't do it. Not natively anyways. So there's this wonderful thing called Key Cloner that I use. I'll link you guys to it in the description of this video, and you can select keyframes with it from multiple layers and simply hit clone. And now they are copied across the miles. It's pretty awesome. Let's go back to this and take a look. Not bad. And we could just like shorten up the eye closing a little bit. I'm just going to move this in so that the half is only going to last 1 frame, and that'll just make it feel a little snappier. And finally, we're going to take our background layer. Oh, got to turn on the blob. Don't forget the blob. Take our background layer. I'm going to duplicate the background layer. I'm going to bring it all the way up to the top, and I'm just going to do a simple fade on it. This way it'll loop nicely. Okay, so just going to shorten this up like so. And just going to make sure that we can see the whole wink. And a little bit more. And then T for opacity, turn on the stopwatch, drop to 0, advance a few frames, make it 100%. Okay, I want the end of my animation to be at 100 frames. I'm going to hit N to set the end of my work area. And there we have it. We're finished. I've included in the description a finished version. So when you click on that bit.ly link, it'll take you to Google Drive, and in that is your PSD, the SWF file that I used in here, as well as the finished version of this so that you can take a look. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments, send me a message, and I hope to see you really soon. Thank you so much for watching. All right, take care. Bye.